Welcome to Netaji Subhash Open University. We are discussing several chapters of goods and service tax, and in this session we will emphasize on the reverse charge mechanism and the tax liability and the procedures as applicable in the case of reverse charges. Before we proceed, let's understand what is reverse charge and what is the forward charge or direct charge. In GST law, every supply is taxable, and the supplier who is supplying the goods or services is liable to issue a particular invoice in that particular format called as tax invoice. And in that particular tax invoice, they need specifically to mention the goods or the services, its category, its nature, and then the applicable tax rates therein. Issue that's very important over here to note that there are certain exceptional cases where the supplier who is supplying goods or services is not raising the invoice, means it's not paying or liable to pay the taxes. It's a recipient, the person who is receiving the goods or services is liable for taxation. And that's the chapter called as reverse charge. That means the recipient, the person who is receiving the goods or services is actually liable for the taxes, not the supplier of the goods and services. That's called reverse charge tax mechanism. So in case of reverse charge, it's the opposite, right? Like I am purchasing certain goods, tobacco leaves and other from the farmers, or that's so far the goods are concerned, or I am engaging, I have engaged a individual advocate, not a form of advocate, an individual advocate to argue a particular issue. In both these cases, one is goods and one is service, but the law says in both these cases, these are the activities where the recipient is liable for taxes, and they need to fulfill all the obligations under the GST law, for payment of taxes, filing of return, and etc., everything, procedural aspects. When this GST reverse charge applicable in GST? Under what circumstances reverse charges are applicable under the GST law? Situation number one, when the supply is from an unregistered dealer to a registered dealer. That means I am purchasing goods or services from an unregistered dealer, the person who is not registered, absolutely a small vendor. I am purchasing a pen from that person. Question comes out, that vendor is below the threshold limit of GST and not taken the registration under the GST law. I am a registered person. Who should pay the tax? The law said very clearly that in this sort of a case, the registered person shall be liable to pay the taxes. However, you have to understand, students, you have to understand that whenever the law, this particular law called as GST Act, the rules and several notifications, several directions by the GST Council, and of the notification which is prevailing as of now is that purchases from the unregistered person on a reverse charge has been temporarily kept in halt. So at present it is not applicable, but my friends, you have to be very careful. You need to read the law, and the law says that the registered dealer who has to pay GST under reverse charge has to do a self-invoicing for purchases made therefrom. So the law is there is a notification temporarily, but the law very clearly says if I am a registered person, purchase from an unregistered dealer, I need to pay the taxes to the government under a reverse charge mechanism. And what is the mechanism? The mechanism says the registered dealer who has right to pay, who has obligations to pay the GST under the reverse charge under this particular case, that means procurement from unregistered vendor, has to do a self invoicing. I am invoicing on me for the purchases made from the unregistered person. And for interstate purchases, the buyer has to pay the IGST. For interstate purchases, the purchaser has to pay the CGST and SGST to be paid by the purchaser under the reverse charge mechanism. So in this case, IG, CG, SG all are applicable, but it is not a direct charge, it is a reverse charge. And you need to, very careful, you need to, right, issue an invoice. You are issuing an invoice on you only. That's very, very interesting in so far as this GST reverse charge is concerned. Services through an e-commerce operator, category number 2. So wherever there is a service of e-commerce category or commerce operator, the taxes to be paid by the reverse charge, on a reverse charge basis by the recipient of the services. Like if an e-commerce operator supplies services, then reverse charge will be applicable to the e-commerce operator and he will be liable to pay the GST. So the e-commerce operator will be liable to pay the GST. For example, Urban Clap provides services of plumbers, electricians, teachers, beauticians, etc. Urban Clap is liable to pay GST because they are the e-commerce operator. They are like a portal, they are like an aggregator and collect it from the customer instead of the registered service providers. So e-commerce transaction, e-commerce operator is liable for reverse charge. Category number 3 is supply of certain goods and services as specified or notified by the CBIC, Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs. Like they notifies from time to time, and as on today, let's say if we try to understand what the notification is all about, their notifications are very clear about certain goods and of certain services. What are the goods? Let's take 2 examples of goods and 2 examples of services where reverse charges are applicable. This says that notification says it is notification under section 9(3) of the CGST Act, where government can notify goods and services which falls within the definition of reverse charges. Number 1, this says if the goods is cashew nuts, right, and who is a supplier? Supplier is an agriculturist, farmer, agriculturist who is collecting the cashew nuts. Who is the recipient? Who is receiving the goods? Any registered person. So that means I am a registered person, I am procuring the cashew nuts from an agriculturist who is not a registered person. I am liable to pay tax on that goods as per the notification, as per this particular notification. This notification which is updated up to 31st of issued by the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, which is getting notified, updated from time to time. Up to 2019 it is updated and it says that yes, it is applicable. Similar thing is applicable in case of tobacco leaves. The BD refer leaves, the tobacco leaves for cigarettes. Silk ear, if you are any registered person procuring from a person who is a manufacturer of silk yarn from the silk or cocoons, who are the supplier of silk cocoons, these are all falling within the definition of reverse charges. Coming to the most applicable thing which we can really, on a real life, we can visualize it. In case of services, what has been provided in this notification where the government can notify it? This says that if the service, the nature of the service is a transport agency service, goods transport agency service, GTA in short, right? The GTA is GTA services falls within the definition of reverse charge. That means a entity, a business entity, a company who is actually engaging this GTA, the transporter owner need not to pay any GST. The person who has engaged the transporter need to pay the GST on a reverse charge mechanism. Example number 2. If a company, if a business entity engage an individual advocate. What is individual advocate? That means an advocate, legal practitioner who is practicing of his own, not a company or not a legal separate registered entity. In that case, that individual advocate need not to charge any GST. The GST to be borne, all the liabilities to be complied by the company, the business, they are engaging that individual advocate. Similarly, one more, if like any of the corporate is taking a sponsorship from any person, reverse charge is applicable. Any of the business entity availing certain services or facilities from a state government or union territories or the local bodies in the nature of renting of immovable property or any other services, then it is also liable for reverse charge. That means your organization is taking the services of Central Reserve Police Force, and for which you are paying to the Government of India. It falls within the definition of 9(3) of CGST Act, called as reverse charge, and the company or the business who is taking this benefit need to pay the taxes, fulfill all the legal compliances, filing of returns, etc. under the reverse charge mechanism. Continuing on the reverse charge, second part. What is the time of supply under reverse charge? Because time of supply for the direct charge we have discussed in another chapter called as time and place of supply. Right now it is the time of supply under the reverse charge. Very interesting, because here I am invoicing on myself. So it says, in case of reverse charge, the time of supply shall be the earliest of the following dates. What are the following dates? The date of receipt of the goods, if it is relating to the goods, date of receipt when I have received it, the date of payment, or the date immediately after 30 days from the date of issue of invoice, by the supplier. Out of these three, which is the earliest, shall be the time for supply under reverse charge mechanism so far as goods are concerned. I repeat it once again, out of these three, whichever is earliest. The examples are most important one in case of services, because that's the place where we mostly see the reverse charge, GTA, individual advocate, sponsorship. The law says, in case of reverse charge, so far as supply of service is concerned, the time shall be considered as the earliest of the following. What are the following? Number 1, the date of payment, when you paid to that party, to that GTA. 2, the date immediately after 60 days from the date of issue of invoice by the supplier. I repeat it once again, all of you can see it. The date immediately after 60 days from the date of issue of the invoice by the supplier. Who is the supplier? GTA is the supplier. 60 days, right, over 61st day, and then the date of payment. Out of these two, whichever is earlier shall be considered as the time of payment. Why it is important? It is important because the time of payment shall give you the tick mark, because you are liable to pay the GST to the appropriate government. You are liable to raise the invoices on yourself, and you are liable to comply GSTR 1, then net payment in GSTR 3B. You have to be very, very careful about all this procedural aspect, particularly the what called as self-invoicing. I repeat, what do you mean by self-invoicing? You are invoicing on yourself because you are shouldering the responsibility of the other person who is not charging GST. You are paying GST for the services rendered by the other person. And for the other person, examples like GTA, the individual advocates, sponsorship, or the government services. Every cases, reverse charge is applicable. We also need to be very careful to keep a watch on the notifications issued by the government, by the Central Board of Excise and Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, to understand whenever there is a change in the methods or the procurement from the unregistered vendors, and the list which covers detail of vendors where reverse charges are applicable. Thank you, my friend, for this session on reverse charge.